Welcome once again to Sid Caudle, Christian People's Alliance. There's not much Christian about in politics these days. We're going to shortly discuss that. But there is a little bit, and we'll go to Charlie Kirk, of course, and the dreadful events, and the dreadful events afterwards that are still going on. And one really concerns me, Sid, is that we can blame the extreme left, which is true, about their reaction, their disgusting reaction to celebrate this. But leading commentators are actually saying, well, it's spreading to the soft left. The soft left, both sides of the Atlantic, are taking up a similar stand. That's not right.
Well, it's interesting that the gap between the soft left and the hard left does seem to be narrowing, interesting enough. And you see, one of the things, I mean, I have been listening to Charlie Kirk's, some of his debates, which he did at universities, which are absolutely amazing. But he's very respectful of people that oppose him, which is good, which is what I've always tried to be. I always tried to be like that at Speaker's Corner, and and it's good because I mean, people used to say to me, even after I debated with them for an hour, "Oh, let me give you something as a sign of our friendship," which shows that people that oppose you respect you, and that generally what happened with Charlie Kirk. But he used to basically whatever people said, he used to say, "Well, what's your evidence to back that up?" And he used to say with Kamala Harris, for instance, what she achieved. What do you think is her greatest achievement? What did she achieve as vice president? And almost invariably, people struggle to answer. But he was also very pro-Israel. He was very clearly anti-abortion. He argued that abortion was murder and that life starts at conception. I heard him say to a doctor, when do brainwaves start in an unborn baby? And he said 4 weeks. He said, well, when does the heartbeat start? He said 6 weeks. So after 6 weeks, then you've got a heart beating and brainwaves. So you've got a living baby, haven't you? And the doctor said yes. You see, so it's interesting, you see, but people that were pro-abortion don't like the fact that he was so clear and so precise and all the time talked about his facts, and it's about the facts of what I'm talking about. And, it's what I've said to people, that are pro-abortion, when does life start? And they can't answer the question because they want to say that, oh, you can kill a baby, up to 24 weeks or whatever, when it's clearly is a baby, and you are clearly killing a baby. But I mean, that's just an example of watching him debate, and he's very clever. But of course, he's also very pro-Israel, and of course, the Muslims don't like that. So I was actually listening to a Muslim imam who in America who was basically saying we should be celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. This is something we celebrate. Now, you see, it's interesting. The soft left tend to be pro-Islam. You don't tend to get anybody on the left that's anti-Islam. But Islam is viciously anti-Semitic. It doesn't matter who you are. And they don't tell the truth because, as we've said before, one of the key aspects of Islam is taqiyya. It's a good thing to lie to disbelievers to gain an advantage. So the soft left tend to be taken in with the lies of Islam just as much as the hard left. So this is the problem that we're battling with at the moment.
Indeed, it is. The other thing that's coming out, of course, is more and more commentators are tracing the culpability of our present demise, because that's what it is, as a country, to Tony Blair. 2.5 decades ago, everything changed. We certainly have not had a proper right-wing conservative government since then. We've had Tony Blair #2 with Cameron, etc. All sorts of things gone on there, but there's not been any lead to the country except via the blob. The civil service have had this country. They formed, as it were, a new party, and that's the party that's been involved for the last 25 or so years. Now, that's no way to run a country, as we can see. Donald Trump said it was the deep state in America. And I think we've got our own deep state here.
Yes, it's interesting. You see, Tony Blair's slogan was New Labour. I mean, everyone knows it was New Labour. So why did he call it New Labour? So I think it was New Age. So basically, Tony Blair was committed to the New Age doctrine. And if you look at the New Age doctrine, it's break the relationship between parents and their children, make divorce easier, make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle, and all these sort of things, which are very much a feature of what he was doing as leader of the Labour Party. But it's also a feature of what the BBC stands for. So he absolutely managed to get the BBC on board. And that was again something that was a very strong feature of Tony Blair's government. Under Alastair Campbell, they were managing the media all the time, making sure that the next day's headlines were favourable to the Labour Party. And very, very successfully, they got the BBC basically on board with New Labour. And of course, it meant that because they were so successful in that regard, that he didn't just win in 1997, he won in 2001, he won in 2005. And it wasn't until he actually left and handed over to Gordon Brown that they were defeated in 2010. So he managed to succeed in winning a whole load of elections through managing the media. But see, what also tends to happen then under New Labour is that during that time when the Labour Party were in office, which was for 13 years, they're also engaging in appointing a whole loads of new civil servants, new heads of the civil service, and so on and so forth. So they're getting their people in key places in government. So when the Conservatives came in 2010 with the Liberal Democrats under coalition, although they had a platform of cutting spending because debt had risen so high, which they did successfully, and seeking to maintain capital spending and maintain taxes or possibly even reduce taxes. They didn't do anything whatsoever to roll back New Labour. So you're absolutely right on that regard. You see, so the whole agenda and to change the civil service. I mean, the whole focus of the government was on the economy, was on reducing spending, and the civil service tried to make it as painful as possible. So they didn't get to grips with cutting red tape, for instance, which the Liberal Democrats didn't want to do anyway. They focused cutting spending on cutting benefits and cutting the National Health Service and cutting education and cutting local government spending and so on and so forth, because they said, oh, if you're going to cut spending, you're going to have to cut it at the sharp end, which is not true. That's not true at all, but that's what the civil service did. So you're quite right. Now then, when the Conservatives won in 2015, the focus then was almost entirely on the EU referendum, which took place in 2016. So there was no focus whatsoever on introducing an effective Conservative government. And then when David Cameron lost the EU referendum, he immediately resigned. Theresa May came in, but her focus was entirely on, in Theresa May's terms, on getting an agreement with the EU on leaving, which was a terrible agreement that she got, but that's what her focus was on. It wasn't on changing the civil service or changing the focus of the government. You see, one of the things which I've said, which the Christian People's Alliance says, for instance, is that we should be going back to GP fund holding, which worked so well in the 1990s, in order to save enormous amounts of money on the NHS and to get the GP system working properly. Now, you see, that's something which maybe they couldn't introduce in the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, but they could certainly have introduced in 2015. But because their focus was so much on the EU, it was never done. And then when Boris Johnson came in with a platform again of get Brexit done, I mean, he faced COVID almost immediately, really, just within months of his government. So he wasn't able to do anything radical. So you're absolutely right. Nothing radical has ever been done.
And radical needs doing, of course, at the moment. for various reasons, none more so than the Mandelson affair. It beggars belief, Sid. Talk about emperor's new clothes here. Everybody. I mean, we're 3,000 miles away from UK. And when his name was first mentioned, I lit up. And I've not been involved that closely in the last 10 years or so in UK politics. And it was a nonsense, even. I mean, Mandy Mandelson is famous for his black arts. And so it's happened again. And it's going to sink Starmer eventually. Now, I use the word eventually. Tell me what that means, Sid. Is it going to be tomorrow or a long time off?
Well, what's interesting, you see, is the fact that Starmer is now admitting that he knew about Mandelson's links with Epstein. So that then poses a number of questions, because if he knew about the links with Epstein, it basically means either he didn't ask the questions which he needed to ask, or the questions were asked but Mandelson lied in response, or that the questions were asked, Mandelson told the truth, and Starmer is now lying about what he knew. One of those three things operates. Now, all those three things, frankly, put Starmer in a bad light because, if he didn't ask the questions, he should have asked the questions as Prime Minister. He should have been saying, okay, knew about links. I need to have a proper, thorough investigation into exactly what happened and what went on. It's obvious, isn't it? But either that didn't happen, or if Mandelson lied, they should have been able to expose the lies, frankly, and should have been able to prove. I mean, it's not that difficult if somebody's lying to look at the evidence and find the evidence and say, wait a minute, what you're saying here is not true. So it shows Starmer in a very bad light. I think the truth is that Starmer knew exactly what was going on between Mandelson and Epstein and thought it would never come to light and didn't matter. But now, of course, suddenly documents appear which show that how deeply involved he was with Epstein and the fact that he was actually trying to overturn Epstein's conviction and get him released early and all these sorts of things. So basically, Mandelson was saying that it didn't matter what Epstein was doing, which of course it did matter. It mattered extremely. But now all that's come to light. Suddenly, Starmer's like, oh dear, yes, no, I didn't know. I think he did know. But you see, Starmer's not an honest person. We know full well he's not an honest person. But yes, it was a terrible decision to allow Mandelson to be the US ambassador, and Starmer is absolutely responsible for that terrible decision.
You've used the L word, the lie word, Sid, and let's broaden this out a bit because people are absolutely fed up. They're absolutely getting it regarding, and I'm not talking about you, politicians in general. They lie. Let's simplify it. You've only got to be in one of Donald Trump's famous press encounters in the White House, and he may be lying. But I tell you what, he answers yes or no, or he says, I can't answer that question at the moment because, and that is straightforward and honesty. And it doesn't happen in British politics. Sid, they are trained. They go to school when they become a politician. And they're told how, number one, if you don't like the question, you can't answer it. You immediately go and say, oh, this is because of 14 years of Tory rule or another bypass. Changing the subject is the favourite one, of course, and not answering the question. Why do politicians lie?
Because they want to hide the truth of what's going on. That's the reality of it. You see, I think Starmer's come unstuck. I agree with you totally, by the way. I actually really enjoy watching Donald Trump's press conferences because of how honest he is. And he's very honest in every position that he's in. When people ask him questions, he gives an honest answer. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's even the Israeli bombing of Doha, he says, well, it's a good thing to wipe out Hamas, but I don't think it's furthered their objectives bombing Doha. I don't think it's the right thing to do. He's like totally honest and straightforward as what his opinion is of the bombing of Doha. He's because most politicians, as you say, would say, well, this is something that we need to, we need to consider in the broader spectrum, and it's we support Israel in their objectives, but we can't comment on that, and don't actually answer the question. But you see, I think Starmer's come unstuck in the last few weeks because, first of all, he had the Angela Rayner situation. And when he was questioned in Parliament, he's like, I support Angela Rayner, I'm proud to have her as my deputy, and so on and so forth. And then a matter of 2 or 3 days later, Angela Rayner's forced to resign. So, you know, what he should have done was gone to Parliament and said in Parliament, I've got major concerns over what's gone on here. And absolutely a thorough investigation is needed, and a thorough investigation is underway. And when we get the full investigation and the full report, then I will make further comment. That would have been an honest answer. Instead of that, she has my full report. She has my full support. But then we have the very similar situation the next week with Peter Mandelson, where he's asked all the questions about Peter Mandelson, and his answer is Peter Mandelson has my full support. I think he's doing a wonderful job as US ambassador. And then he's asked specifically, what did you know? Did you know? Did you know? And he's like, he refuses to answer the question. He just says, well, there was a thorough vetting process took place, and I support the thorough vetting process that took place. He wouldn't actually answer what he knew. But then the next day, it's like he's sacked. So actually, if Starmer had gone to the House of Commons and said, I've got major concerns at the moment about Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I did know about it before he was appointed, but I didn't think it amounted to much. But there is new information coming to light. I've got to look at that new information. I will be looking at it, and I'll be making a decision in the next few days as to whether he can continue or not. That would have been an honest answer, and people would have respected him for giving an honest answer. I think, frankly, the fact that, he said, Angela Rayner has my full support, Peter Mandelson has my full support, and then a couple of days later, the people resign, means that Starmer looks a fool, frankly, as well as being dishonest.
Indeed, and we go from there into the other farce of the week, one in, one out. I think every commentator in existence has said from the beginning, this is a joke. How can it possibly work? Oh, and then we're told they'll be going back on Air France. Well, if I was a passenger on Air France, I wouldn't fancy sitting next to these unknown people with probably a dubious background. And day one, the ECHR has come in and said, oh, somebody's appealed about you going back. Right, you'll have to stay. And stay they do. I repeat, it's a farce, isn't it?
Well, in my view, it's never a serious attempt to return people. I mean, what they were talking about was maybe 50, were going to be returned on a one in, one out basis, where actually it's 50 out of thousands. And a lot of, well, GB News and Daily Mail picked this up. It's like, the percentage is tiny compared with the numbers coming over. So, in my view, it was only ever designed as a sort of optics, a window dressing, something we're going to pretend that we're sending people back. And we're going to make it sound as though we're making an effort to send people back, and just send a few back to make it look as though, yes, people are going back. I think that's all it was. It reminds me of when Macron was over here, when he got his police to get a knife and put a knife into the boats. And it's like, yes, they managed to have the the cameras there, and the cameras have showed the police getting a knife into the boats and letting the boats back so they can't go across. It's conveniently while Macron was in the United Kingdom, that's what they did. They only ever did it once, and they only did it once in front of the cameras. It was just tokenism, and an awful lot is going on is tokenism. And by the way, while we're talking about this, since we've had this Shabana Mahmood, this new Home Secretary that's come in, she's announced that immigrants are going to be put into army barracks, and then she announced that she's going to have any countries that don't allow immigrants to return to their country aren't going to be allowed to have visas for anyone from their country to come to the UK. That's what she's announced, but it's not happening. No immigrants are being put in army barracks. No countries that are refusing to have immigrants back are being denied visas, and in any case, there's hardly anyone being sent back. So it's all just image. The whole thing is image. We're going to pretend that we're doing a job, but we're not actually going to do anything at all. That's what's going on.
The PR men are really in charge. Going back to the word lie, something that I've mentioned on other programs that certainly needs mentioning, and the British public have sussed the thing out now. The march. Now, I suspect so many things, especially looking at the numbers involved there. Even GB News have been got at. They've actually upped it from 100,000 to 150,000. But that's rubbish, Sid. The Blob, our civil servants want to wash their, oh, well, it's only a little march compared with other marches. No, it wasn't. It was at least the second biggest in decades. It was massive. And it's not difficult to prove it yourself, even if you get the Guardian's footage from the drone. And there's ways of getting Google involved. There's ways of using artificial intelligence that will count the people. And it's more like, well, just under 1 million that were there. Now, why should GB News, for instance, because they've been got out all the time by Ofcom, come out with 150,000? Even their own reporter said, oh, it's at least 3 times as much as everybody's saying. It was actually on the ground. And he had a limited view, not a drone view. It was several times more than that, 10 times more than they said. We are being controlled, Sid. We cannot get the truth at many levels in this country, whether it be straight talking, lying politicians, or even the mainstream media, who are being leaned on so that the whole truth does not come out.
Yes, if I might just say regarding GB News, I've noticed that although their main presenters seem to be very good, and whether you like it or not, most of them seem to support reform. You tend to find their actual news bulletins are different. And the news bulletins, I don't know where they come from. They don't come from GB News. I think they come from Sky News or something. Because they're often completely wrong, and they say things which don't fit with what the presenters are saying at all, and seem to have a completely different approach. I think that's the problem. So really, what you're talking about is your GB News bulletin, not your GB News presenters. And well, like you've already said that the GB News presenters said, oh, I think that what they're reporting was something like 3 times. I think you're probably right about 1 million. I was actually speaking to somebody on the phone this morning who was at the march, and he said all the bridges were blocked, which I know as well because my wife was in the centre of London on that day doing something completely different, and she was at Blackfriars Station, and she said Blackfriars Bridge was completely jam-packed with demonstrators, and that was a long, long way from the centre of the demonstration, Blackfriars Bridge. I mean, but if the whole of London from Blackfriars Bridge up to the centre was blocked, and they said apparently all the other bridges were blocked as well, Lambeth Bridge was blocked, Westminster Bridge was blocked, Tower Bridge was blocked, all of them were blocked. Now, if all of them were blocked with people all the way up to the centre of London, we are talking easily about 1 million people. So the evidence is certainly right that there was about 1 million. I don't think 3 million is right. I mean, that's also been a figure that's mentioned. I think round about 1 million is the correct figure. But yes, it was just purely for political reasons that the numbers were underreported. And by the way, also there was a counter march there that was, they said, of about 5,000 people on the counter march. And apparently, this counter march was absolutely, completely surrounded so that they couldn't actually get out. And they didn't get out till about 6 o'clock because literally everything was just so completely blocked and that they couldn't move. So, but that's not something that was reported. You'd think from what was being reported that there were two marches, which were a similar size. But actually, it was, that wasn't the case at all.
No, it was the tiny renter mob that turn up to absolutely everything. And going back to GB News just for a second about presenters and being leaned on, there's no finer presenter than Mark Steen,
Mm.
Dan Wootton and co. and the other Mark. They were removed by the blob, by Ofcom. Now that's how much control there is in the United Kingdom over the media. It's disgraceful.
Yeah, no, but that's what they say. I mean, Mark Steen and Dan Wootton both say we were removed because of Ofcom. And I do understand GB News being concerned about their license and having to respond to things that Ofcom say. And I guess if Ofcom were saying, sorry, you're going to have to get rid of these people or else your license is going to be cancelled, GB News are going to say, well, we can't afford to lose our license. We're going to have to do what Ofcom are asking us.
Mm.
Um, so that's a major problem. In my view, Ofcom are very, very dangerous organisation. They're certainly very anti-Christian, and I think one of the major reasons why we haven't been able to get on GB News or on any mainstream media at all is because of Ofcom in the background. And it was quite interesting. You see, the one time when I was on the BBC at the time of the 2017 general election, which was a very challenging interview, but I think, I came out of it very well, yeah, and answered their questions very precisely and specifically. One of which, by the way, was you said Islam is a false religion, and I said yes, and started quoting the Quran as to what it said, and it was like they couldn't change the subject quick enough. But you see, the BBC would have hated me saying those things live on air. Ofcom would have hated me saying those things. When I came out on that day, some of the presenters said, "Oh, it's been very good television, very interesting. That you put your point of view, very clearly. We'll have you on again." But of course, they never did because I reckon Ofcom in the background are like, if you have him on again, then you'll lose your license. So we effectively all Christian People's Alliance people have been banned from mainstream television, in my opinion, because of Ofcom.
Yeah, I go back a long way with Ofcom when I used to run a Sky channel and indeed was part of another channel. And we were covering at that time, and it's going back nearly 20 years, abortion. Nobody had shown an abortion. We got hold of footage from America and we conformed with everything that Ofcom said. You can't put that on till 11 o'clock at night, even. You've got to put warnings on, and we did everything correct. And my goodness me, heaven and earth fell down on me. We subsequently found there was only one complaint. Wow, that is phenomenal. But because they had one complaint, they came down and said, you can't do things like this ever again. At least they said ever again. They didn't get rid of me there and then. But that's how it's always been this way, Sid.
Yeah, so I'm laughing because we had an incident in Hitchin, funnily enough, when they had a drag queen story hour was scheduled for Hitchin Library, and I complained, and I was told that they've had a lot of people saying that they want one in Hitchin Library. So I actually put a request in under the Freedom of Information Act, and I said, okay, well, you said a lot of people, exactly how many, and what evidence were you given, that that they're well received, what evidence were you given of that? And they actually had to give me the fact. And the fact was, one person had walked into Hitchin Library and said, I've been to a drag queen story hour in Basildon, which was miles and miles away from Hitchin, and it was very well received. And can you have one in this library? One person made the request, only one person. And, and so basically what they said was a blatant lie. Unfortunately, that drag queen story hour never happened, and it's never, and thank God, because I actually did what I did, they were forced to actually back down and not have it.
Yeah. Yep, that's the way it goes. Let's tell you something else about the way it goes. It's called Serco, another hidden gem in the merry weave of how things are working. Serco are responsible for all sorts of things, especially with NHS. And they are providers of everything, whether it be in the good old days of COVID, masks, or whether it be the number of helpers, trainees, nurses, or whatever. It doesn't seem to be functional, the NHS, which it isn't, or the procurement side of it. Now, the NHS should be ordering these themselves, or the government, or the civil service. They run, it's a nationwide nationalised industry. But the lazy way out is, Serco are brilliant at getting hotels for illegal immigrants. They're brilliant at buying this, that, and the other. Give it to them. The markup with Serco is double in many cases. Billions of pounds are wasted every year, and Serco have managed to get in again. And they've been asked, actually, to recruit for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. What senior positions in our forces are going to go to Serco for them to decide who will be the next admiral? I am scared about what's happening in Britain at every level, Sid.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You see, that's exactly what Joe Biden did in the United States when he was president. And he was actually removing people that were basically Donald Trump supporters or committed to the professionalism, and putting in people committed to LGBT, to diverse DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, and promoting transgenders within the armed forces and weeding out people that oppose transgenders in the armed forces. And it's like that was his agenda. And maybe it's not that surprising if we have a Labour government in the UK that we pursue a similar sort of Biden type policy. But it's just crazy and just mad. And thank goodness we've got someone like Donald Trump that can actually has got the strength to get to grips with it and say these people are out. I'm not having any of them in. I'm not having any transgenders in the armed forces. All of these policies were just ridiculous and terrible for our effectiveness of the armed forces, and we're changing policy completely. And any woke generals I'm removing. I mean, but frankly, we're going to need a government that's got the guts to do the same in the UK if we're going to be effective.
I agree. Well, Danny Kruger, how about that? We were mentioning him about 6 weeks ago. There he was standing up in Parliament to an empty house there were three there, I think, saying that we've forgotten our Christianity, the spiritual side. And if you want to really cure British problems, it's what we talk about all the time, Sid. You've got to start with that. Get rid of the lies, get rid of the obfuscation, get rid of everything that is not straight and Judeo-Christian principles. Moral compass, it's called these days, whatever. There's your problem. And actually, he's jumped ship. Now, that is one in the eye for Kemi. He did it very gracefully. I've seen the letter he wrote of resignation, and it was praising her and everything else. And sorry, folks, that this has happened, but I've got to go where my heart is, basically. And that he feels at the moment is over to St. Nigel. Now, he's going to be very useful to Farage because he's a real kingmaker and he organises things. But interesting, isn't it?
Yes, I've got enormous respect for Danny Kruger. He's a wonderful Christian. It is interesting when he was making that speech that you referred to, basically saying that I'm a committed Christian and we need Christian values in the nation. He was actually wearing a turquoise tie when he made that speech. I don't know if you noticed that, which he actually says now that he was thinking of joining Reform before the last general election when Lee Anderson left the Conservative Party. Um, but he didn't make the decision then, but has been considering it for a long time. So I think this is something that's been in the offing, and he's finally taken the step that he was considering before. But frankly, I wish that he'd left and joined the Christian People's Alliance, but I guess we don't yet have the sort of traction that would make that an attractive proposition for him. But I think we are his natural home because he is a committed Christian and Nigel Farage isn't. And to have actually been in a party that was standing 100% for Christian values would be a lot better than joining a party which is also, frankly, has got a number of Freemasons in it. So it's not committed to Christian values, unfortunately. But, we'll see how he gets on. But I honestly don't know what's going to happen as we move forward. I hope that the Conservative Party and the Reform Party will be able to make some sort of electoral pact. If it's not an official electoral pact, an unofficial one where they focus on which seats, so the Conservatives are allowed to focus on their seats and Reform focus on different seats. Nigel Farage did actually do this before, where he actually agreed not to stand in any seats where there were existing Conservative MPs, he would focus on the other seats. So there is precedent for it, but I think what matters now is that we get the Labour Party out, we get, a government in power that's going to change things substantially along the lines of the way Trump has done things in America. And I'd like to think that Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage could work together effectively to achieve that objective. And I think that objective is far more important than whether we have a Reform government or a Conservative government, frankly.
As a matter of interest, Sid, a fortnight ago, I was interviewing a man, and he was in the Grand Canyon. We got a live link to there. What a background! Astonishing, beautiful.
Mm.
And he's a modern day prophet.
Mm.
And he wanders around the world basically and gets into political situations and gives, as he says, a word from God to various people. And he sent me some footage of him meeting Nigel Farage over in the States when Farage was over there. And this was before he was getting things together with Reform. And he had a word of prophecy about Nigel Farage that he would one day compete to being Prime Minister of England. Well, it's happening. Strange things happen, Sid. But maybe we should get back and listen more to some of our church leaders because they're in an equal difficult position, not knowing what to believe as our politicians are.
No, well, it's we had a word which has been delivered. I mean, because we have CPA prophetic, and the word that we had was that God wanted to smash the two-party system, and we had that word was delivered, a couple of years ago, And at that time, smashing the two-party system didn't seem to be something that was really viable because, with the one first past the post system, it seems to be either Conservative or Labour. But now, smashing the two-party system seems to have already happened and seems to be almost expected, anticipated at the next general election. And the Labour Party looks as though it's in serious trouble, and the Conservative Party looks as though it's in serious trouble. And there's other parties rising up, and the Green Party are actually rising up in the opinion polls, interestingly enough. And I think there'll be a number of Labour MPs that could well defect to the Green Party, not on the people on the left. And we got, Corbyn talking about starting a new party, but his new party seems to be struggling to get off the ground, partly because of his joint leader hasn't yet learned that you don't criticise other people in your party, which she's been criticising Corbyn, she's been criticising everybody she can think of. And it hardly makes for cohesion in a new party when you've got a leader that's doing that. So I mean, his party's struggling. But, at the same time, it looks as though the two-party system in the UK is over and good, great. But yeah, I mean, God does speak. And God does tell, says he doesn't do anything without first telling his servants, the prophets. So, absolutely. We should expect to know in advance what God is planning, what God is going to do. But I still believe that in time, the CPA will rise up to be a national party. I mean, we're not there yet, but God could do it tomorrow. Something could happen that actually projects the CPA to being, discussed in all the news items, or, right across the board. And we're ready in the sense that I believe that we've got the best manifesto of any political party, which I've talked about on here sometimes. Some of the policies that we've got, which I believe are the right policies for the nation, without a shadow of doubt. So because we've got such a strong manifesto, I believe we're ready, which in a way, frankly, I don't think Reform are yet. I mean, Danny Kruger might put that right, but Reform need to do an awful lot of work on their manifesto because if they do actually get into government, which they may well do, they need to be ready. They need to be ready with a manifesto that they can implement. The Labour Party weren't ready, frankly, for last year when they got into power. They haven't got a manifesto that is ready for government, which they should have done, but they hadn't.
Well, they've not got the troops either if one analyses it a bit more deeply. And the quality of some MPs, much to be desired. Sticking with Nigel a little bit longer, he came along not so long ago and said, I'll get the boat sorted in 2 weeks. Well, he's rowed back to keep to the naval theme about this. He realizes that truth in unless we get a ECHR, unless we get Tony Blair's bill, both of them out the way, nothing can happen in 2 weeks. Then it is possible, but not until that happens, Sid.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I guess it would be quite easy to stop the boats. I mean, all you got to do is to put a few Navy frigates there, in the channel, and basically said no boats will pass, quite simply. The problem, like you say, is that then someone comes along and says you're breaching human rights and courts rule, and then they start saying that you've got to pay compensation to all these immigrants that haven't been allowed to come into the UK or something. It's just all a farcical situation. And then they appeal against it, but then you got, I don't know, court rulings that, the compensation must be paid and so on and so forth, which again would take a time to sort out. But, I guess Britain would be taken to international courts. But, one of the things you learn about international courts, by the way, is that international courts have got really very little enforcement power. And there's very little actual international law to base their decisions on. So, that's why all this ridiculous stuff about the Chagos Islands. Oh, well, and the international courts have ruled that we've got to hand over the Chagos Islands. The international court rulings are just blatantly stupid. And the fact that we're taking notice of this international court ruling, which is apparently just in favour of the Chinese, the fact that we're taking notice of it is ridiculous because they can't enforce it. If we say, no, sorry, we're not handing over the Chagos Islands, there's no body that can come along and say, well, we're going to force you to. I mean, it's just ridiculous, it's just stupid. We just should turn around to the international court and say, on your bike, we're not interested. You
Yeah,
know,
a lot of crazy things here, Sid, going along. And I tell you, as you reached this particular juncture and on international law, this last week, Gibraltar has celebrated in a wonderful way 33 years of being free from Spain following their vote, which was 90 odd percent, well, 98% odd. Almost everybody, man, woman, child, as if they could vote, wanted to remain British. And the high street there, the main street as it's called, full of British flags, far more than even those flying in Britain today. There's enough of those. That's changed for the good. And they were saying, never, we will never go. And yet, behind the scenes, the politicians are, dare I say, using their lies to do a deal with Spain. And they've agreed something without telling the full number of what's going to really happen. It's a long document and it's full of conditions, and they're not publishing the conditions. This is typical of politics, especially in Spain. It's just as bad here as it is in the United Kingdom. We don't trust the politicians. They do things behind people's backs. Where is democracy?
no, absolutely. I mean, the principle should be self-determination. It should be the principle for
Yes.
Chagos Islands, for Gibraltar, and frankly for everyone. We talked about it in Ukraine as well. The principle should be self-determination with proper ballots, so people can properly vote with free and fair ballots, and then make a decision. And nobody on the Chagos Islands should be forced to be to lose their British nationality and have to become Mauritian or Chinese or whatever they want. No one should be forced. And it's exactly the same for Gibraltar. But you see, this is where, because we've got a prime minister that is so committed to international law and international bodies, who wants a one world government and so on and so forth. He's willing to ride roughshod over what people think and what people want, and that is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. But he's going to be out. Starmer's going to be out at the first opportunity, and he's probably not going to last more than a few weeks because the Labour Party realise now he's so unpopular that he can't last.
Better the devil you know, Sid.
Well, yes, I mean it's they're talking about the alternative being Andy Burnham, and I've got no confidence whatsoever in Andy Burnham being a better Prime Minister. Absolutely.
Right, we've mentioned Keir Starmer on a number of occasions. Can I say the same problem exists for our footy section finally? And that's with Manchester United. There seems to be no sense, rhyme, or reason. We've got there an incumbent that Amarin I'm referring to, that's got the worst record in United's history. Nobody seems to be able to get rid of him. And this surprises me, Sid, because you've got a very capable businessman now in charge, allegedly. Are the Glazers still actually in charge? But he seems to be doing things on the balance sheet of Manchester United. But what's he thinking of? Not getting rid of a man with the worst track record ever. Nobody will employ him. They think they've got a foreign club that he can go to. But Amarin will not change his modus operandi when the team plays. And neither will Keir Starmer, of course. He's wedded to ECHR, and Amarin is wedded to a system that worked well in Portugal. Well, I'm sorry, Portugal is, and we know it very well, is like Scotland. You've got two teams and the rest. And it's the same in Portugal. If you can't adapt your game to the football league, the Premiership, then you're lost. And this very day, just before we came on air, we got a long letter about data. The whole thing is been built on data, which is the mantra of most football clubs, one has to say, sadly. And they've proven that Manchester United have improved from last season because they've had 20 odd shots in goal, and their passing in the last quarter has revolutionised itself. But they still lose, Sid, and we are, I don't know, regaled in data. We're smothered by data, and we don't sit back to Emperor's New Clothes. We don't see the truth because we follow the data, and it's sunk Manchester United. How do you get rid of somebody like this? That it's not working, Sid. What are we? What's in our mentality? What's in the mentality of Jim Ratcliffe? I mean, if he had a CEO that performed like this, he'd be off ski. Jim Ratcliffe has sacked many people at Manchester United. And I'm sure with his Ineos connections has sacked many people in the unreal world of business, or is it the real world? But he can't get rid of one man. And the fans now are turning against it, as politically the same things happen.
Yes. Now it's interesting, you see, football basically is supposed to be a very enjoyable sport. And at the end of the day, the players have got to enjoy playing the game. And Amorim said something that really shocked me when he actually said, I hate my players sometimes. Now, I think that is very, very dangerous. If you look at Guardiola, Guardiola's very, very good at putting his arms around his players, praising them, even when they've done badly, supporting them, encouraging them. And the man management, I think, is extremely important in football. And this is where Roy Keane fell down, by the way, because he seemed to be a very good manager and very effective manager, but he lost his dressing room because he was so aggressive and so, what he was trying to do was to provoke his players to play better, to play harder, to work harder, and so on and so forth. But he never really praised, congratulated, put his arm around them. And once you've lost the dressing room no longer want to play for you, then frankly, you can never recover. And I think Amorim's lost his dressing room. I don't think he'll ever recover. I think what Manchester United have got to do now is to find somebody else that they can put in place, get ready to take over, and then they'll probably get rid of him as soon as they got someone to appoint in his place. Because I'm afraid the writing's on the wall now for Amorim. He's got to go, yeah.
Dare I say, lastly, perhaps we should get Keir Starmer at Manchester United, or even, dare I say, Jose Mourinho. He could manage the club. You're shaking your head.
Well, I see what I've just said is interesting about Jose Mourinho, you see, because Jose Mourinho is very good at detail, what you've talked about, very good at football tactics, but not good at man management. And it's his poor man management, unfortunately, that's been his downfall in club after club. And he's now got to a point where I'm sorry, he can't come back.
Sid, always a pleasure. Thank you for words of wisdom, even for football words of wisdom. We'll see you next week.